Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us, or thank you for kind of congregating with us this morning. We're very pleased and grateful that you are attending. Hope you and your families are well also. So let's get started, shall we? So for a number of you, you may actually have been able to attend over the last couple of webinars as well. Today, in this session, we're going to focus on how we can apply digital learning to improve organizations and communities. Now, those communities could be at different levels. It could be the community of your team, of your organization, of your city, of your society. So we'll just outline some of the key principles at play here as an extension of the arguments we've already made in this short series already, okay? So you'll remember, those of you who were able to join previously, that this is the third of 3 webinars. In the first one, we spoke about the evolving role of technology in our lives and work. And then secondly, we progressed to kind of talk about how we can harness technology to actually build personalized digital learning strategies. And so in essence, 2 weeks ago, on April the 13th, I think it was, we opened our that week with the first in the series of these webinars. And as we said, we focused on building and applying digital learning strategies. In that first webinar, we began a journey together. And today, as we did last week, we'll continue the journey that we started then. In that first session, we aimed at arriving at a point where we could understand and explain to others practical examples of what digital learning actually is, how we might think about disruptive technology, and where, in fact, the technology revolution of the last 50 years or so has actually brought us to. You'll remember that we defined digital learning as the practice of achieving learning outcomes through a considered and focused application of technology. We visited Toaston in Ghana to show how that team are using mobile technologies to tackle the somewhat paralyzing impact of illiteracy. Then closer to home, we outlined some experiments that are taking place with virtual realities, virtual worlds, telepresence robotics, closer, as I say, closer to home at OCP, UM6P also. Now, while the missions and objectives of the various teams conducting these digital learning experiments may be different, they all share the same ambition. In each case, we're looking to recalibrate our human relationship with technology to help us individually and collectively realize more of our potential, and in doing so, actually fix some of the very serious human problems we have in front of us. In order to give sense and order to the technology opportunities we all have in front of us, we introduced the concept of a periodic table of digital elements. That table borrows, of course, from the vision put forward by Mendeleev back in 1869 with the first publication of his elegant design. At the time, he stated that his vision was an attempt towards a chemical conception of the ether. In our case, 150 years later, with our version, we're looking to suggest a way of ordering our business thinking about the various families of transformative technologies, such as AI, robotics, cyber, crypto, analytics, as well as human elements, all of which have the potential to disrupt our lives and work. During that first session, having briefly outlined our periodic table of digital elements, we discussed where we actually are today with regards to technology and put forward, hopefully, an interesting view and a rational view of how we actually got here. To support our investigation of these important questions, we connected 2 mutually supportive concepts. The first was Moore's law, and the second came from an ancient story about mathematics, and in fact, the introduction of the game of chess. That story was made relevant to the present age by the innovator and futurist Ray Kurzweil. Now, in combining these 2 concepts, we explored how over the last 50 years or so, we've seen the exponential growth of technology and its related innovations arrive at a point where it can explain the explosion of science fiction type technologies that we've seen over the last years. By sharing the idea of our periodic table and then looking at the elements of the table through the lens of Moore's law and exponential growth, we looked to provide a logical and practical view of what we might expect to see with regard to the evolving role of technology in our lives and work. Based on this, over the next few years, we can expect technology to reach even further and deeper into how we work, and also to reshape key relationships that sit at the heart of how our organizations and communities actually think and act. Then last week, we looked at how we can harness that technology, the technology elements that we have in our periodic table, to build our own personalized digital learning strategies. We looked at how networks are a fundamental pattern of our lives. In fact, wherever we see life, we see networks. Networks, in fact, create the shapes and the structures of our societies. For example, in agrarian society, networks were predominantly local, orbiting around a local radius of workplace, places of worship, and family home, often all within a 5 or a 10 or 15 kilometer radius. Then, in the industrial society, with the gravitational pull of cities, we saw individuals and often entire families relocating within the same or different countries. Networks in the industrial societies were more geographically dispersed. Last week, we spoke about Henry Ford's production line philosophy. We said that it didn't just deliver affordable cars, but influenced a one-size-fits-all approach to manufacturing, media, and indeed education that's being overturned in today's digital economy. Today, in fact, Henry Ford's comments that people can have the Model T in any color as long as it's black is really somewhat outdated in a world where we're moving from mass production to mass personalization, and from mass communication, we're on our way towards mass collaboration, hopefully. Our world is neither flat nor round. More realistically, it shapeshifts dynamically based on the networks we activate to share and receive information and experience. Today, the activities that shape and sculpt our human lives are largely organized in global digital networks. Just think about banking, production, mass media, entertainment, education, and social media. The nodes of our digital age are transforming the institutions and organizations of our society into a global network that allows for the flow of information, experience, and identity inside and outside of national organizational borders. Against this backdrop, in the same way that previous industrial revolutions changed our education systems, we need to change the way we teach and learn to fit how we work and live in today's digital age. Then last week, we also spoke about the organizational need to mind the gaps between the industrial and digital society. This is the second bullet point here on this slide. The reality for our teams and organizations is that we need to mind the gaps created in our workforce and business strategies. In order to effectively move from possibilities to opportunities, to choices, to action, we need new skills in new people, new places, in newly accelerated timeframes. This is where, in my opinion, digital learning and the toolkit it provides you with becomes an essential requirement for all organizations and teams today. The way we taught and learned in the agrarian and industrial ages simply won't work for us today in the digital economy. We need an education system that's at the same pH level as the world around it. The bottom line here is that digital learning provides you with this capability. How effectively you teach and learn will determine how effectively we convert the challenges posed by all of those technologies we saw in our periodic table, into opportunities for sustainable, healthy growth. Mind the Gap, of course, comes from the London Underground, and just like that refrain, when stepping into the digital economy, you'll need to mind the gap. Bridging the gap between the industrial and digital economy, between how your teams and organizations need to think about work, tasks, and jobs, how you need to lead and manage yourself, your teams, your organization, and the strategies you will need to help you achieve growth are all very important today. Then last week, we also introduced an approach called reverse engineering the future, borrowed from a friend and colleague of mine, Steve Shepherd. This approach, this technique, instead of beginning in the present and marching forward, it's a process that actually starts in the future by crafting first the vision you want to achieve. From there, we march backwards, identifying and eliminating all of the obstacles that would otherwise impede our ability to reach the future state we desire. This reverse engineering process has 5 components: an achievable vision, a set of powerful organizational values, a desired mission and completion date, a strategy for achieving that mission, a set of objectives required to enable the strategy, and finally, an action plan that facilitates and enables you to reach your objectives. We then finished up last week by talking about or introducing a 4D digital learning model. This particular model is based on the idea that every team and every organization's future and present are different. And so it's not really going to work to have a standard one-size-fits-all digital learning strategy, or in fact, learning strategy of any type. Therefore, we're going to need personalized digital learning strategies that fit each of our teams and organizations' unique realities. As a result of the digital teaching and learning experiments we've conducted, we've developed this 4D model to help organizations build that digital learning strategy that fits what they need right now when they need it. The 4D model is built upon 4 elements, strangely enough: discovery, design, delivery, and data. We consider these to be the foundation of a successful digital learning strategy for every organization. This particular model allows us to craft a deliberately chosen track of forward motion as we develop a strategy and a life cycle that realistically ensures it's going to be effective over the course of its lifetime. So this brings us to this webinar today. We'll start off with this very important question. So how can we apply digital learning such that it helps improve lives, organizations, cities, and society in general? I think I would argue that the first thing we need to do is to actually explore the relationship between digital and physical learning. I think they have to be combined. I think of them as a double helix. Double helix learning is based on the concept that a well-designed digital learning strategy creates a highly functional learning link to the physical world. In the same way that the 2 upright sides of the DNA ladder are connected via the unique base pair rungs, a well-designed digital learning strategy connects the physical and digital learning modalities. In order to actually make these connections, though, we need to have in place these particular rungs that you can see here, the 4 C's of organizational functionality: communication, collaboration, cooperation, and compromise. In fact, these 4 functions, much like the 4 bases found in DNA, that is adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine provide the uniqueness and the strength that will hold your model together. An organization can have best-in-class teaching and learning content, but I would argue that if these four functions are lacking, they won't osmotically flow between physical and digital contexts. So let's just think about this for a moment. Fundamentally, what I'm suggesting is that the best approaches to learning in general, today and tomorrow, require and involve physical and digital learning together. We shouldn't be looking at one or the other in isolation, but looking for opportunities to actually use them together, okay? Now, I think it's fair to say that in certain quarters, digital learning in the past may have been perceived as a bit of a poorer relative or an inferior substitute to physical learning. I'm not looking for one moment to downplay the relative merits of physical learning, but simply to recognize that digital and physical learning strategies together can actually be more than the sum of their parts. We shouldn't look or we shouldn't think about them as separate entities, but rather as complementary mechanisms to deliver learning effectively and efficiently. Depending on the context and learning objectives, content can and should be delivered via one or both of the mechanisms. Indeed, physical and digital content can be overlaid upon each other to support the learning process and the application of new knowledge. In fact, I'd like to suggest that we take a step back from our preconceptions of both physical and digital learning and explore the benefits of adopting a double helix view. As with pointillism art, where small, distinct dots of colour form patterns, if we stand too close to the image, it's hard to see the full picture. If we take a step back from our learning strategies, metaphorically, we might see that the true image of learning today is made up of dots of digital and physical colour, working together to deliver the end result, the bigger picture, if you will. By employing the concept and construct of the double helix, I'm suggesting there's an inextricable relationship between physical and digital learning that we should explore. I also think there are methods we can use to effectively and efficiently convert physical learning experiences into digital learning and vice versa. For example, by building comprehensive experience maps that detail all of the steps in a physical learning interaction, we capture the source code with which it can then be rewritten and run digitally, like an algorithm. Conversely, by creating data maps that digitally detail how a participant completed learning objectives in a technology-driven experience, we're capturing the sequencing that can be helpful when looking to achieve the same learning outcome in a physical classroom. We might reasonably expect physical and digital learning to work together in our teams and organizations. To do so effectively, we need to lead and manage our use of them both effectively together. As employees and people managers in today's digital economy, we need to become more comfortable with, in the words of my colleague Tom Malone at MIT, moving from command and control to cultivate and collaborate styles of leadership. I'd suggest that effective communication, collaboration, cooperation, and compromise are required to create double helix learning in your organizations and teams. So this brings me to the point of teams. In addition to adopting a double helix approach, I think in order to effectively apply your digital learning strategy, we have to think about how our teams actually work and interact in our organizations. Building and embedding digital learning requires the coordination of a number of interdependent activities. Often, people building or deploying digital learning for the first time are surprised by how long it takes, how much work actually goes into it, and how many people are actually involved. What we find is that digital learning actually brings together a broad range of business functions and often requires working actively with groups outside of our normal standard reporting lines. I found that digital learning works best when we operate a team of teams approach. Digital learning is fundamentally a team sport. I first encountered this term, team of teams, in General Stanley McChrystal's book of the same name. In his book, he poses the question of what if you could combine the adaptability, agility, and cohesion of a small team with the power and resources of a large organization. I think the concept fits the reality of digital learning really, really well, as it recognizes that there are going to be a cast of players required to successfully build and implement your digital learning solutions. So how should we think about a team of teams? We can think of a team of teams as including individuals from inside and outside of our organizational reporting structures, and indeed, often outside of the company itself. Often, you might find yourself even collaborating with people who are normally competing with you for resources and results, internally and externally. All team of team members, irrespective of their different reporting lines, commit to collaborate on the identified digital learning project. Interactions are characterized by a willingness to be prepared to cooperate and compromise individual interests to ensure collective success. We can also think of a team of team as a network map where individual nodes are switched on as needed to allow a flow of information and knowledge that helps complete a digital learning project. Those nodes don't need to sit in your office or reporting line, and in fact, it's unlikely that they all will. As you begin or continue your digital learning experiments, you'll need to bring in new skills, and no matter how great your existing team or organization, we should never ever forget that there are many more smart people outside your company than there are inside it, no matter how smart your organization actually is today. I would argue that this concept of team of teams is absolutely fundamental and central to success in building and embedding digital learning in your teams and organizations. I'm almost tempted to go as far as to say that if you find yourself putting together a team to work on a digital learning project and everyone is from the same reporting line, you might wish to look again at your team sheet and think about building a slightly more diverse team of teams. Whenever and in whatever ways possible, you should respect and trust your team of teams as much as you do your own team, your own reporting line team. In fact, you should think of these team of team members as intimately as you do the direct colleagues you meet with for tea, lunch, or general water cooler chats. If you can do this, you'll reap the rewards. At times, it won't be easy. Real collaboration, as you all know, never really is. When assembling your team of teams across your organization, look for individuals and groups who have shared interests, goals, and missions. This can be the glue that helps hold your team of teams together. At the beginning, you may find that operating as a team of teams is somewhat uncomfortable. It might feel that you are ceding or giving away control or even power. However, the irony here is that by loosening your control, you might actually gain more. When looking to build and embed and integrate digital learning, please try to think like a team of teams. So where to start? We need to use experimentation to help us create next generation learning solutions and experiences. Each experiment, even when it doesn't provide the answers we expect, is valuable, even if only to identify what next steps we really shouldn't take. Over the last years, I've conducted literally dozens, if not hundreds, of digital learning experiments. And I'd like to briefly share some of the experimentation principles we found, or I found to be useful. So you can see them here on this slide, and I'll just walk through some of them. So the first one here, direction, compasses, not global positioning services. When experimenting, a compass is often more important than GPS. Experiments allow you to test an hypothesis, a direction, without knowing exactly your destination or where the experiment will take you to. Framing problems, the second bullet point. Spend time defining the problem you want to explore with your experiments. Don't worry at the beginning about what the solution or the answer might be. At first, just focus on asking yourselves the right questions. Use that question to define the experiments you want to conduct. Next, a short time frame. Ideally, 6 to 12 weeks is a useful marker. If your experiments take longer to conduct and complete, then perhaps you might explore dividing them into multiple experiments. At times, it's better to make quick progress on smaller problems and use that to create a momentum towards resolving the big questions. The next point around small core teams. It's useful to identify a small core team. Wherever possible, resist the temptation to populate your experiments with only direct colleagues. Build a diverse team with cross-functional representation. As we said before, it's important that your team of team members have a shared interest in conducting the experiment and its succeeding. Remember that your experiments are an opportunity to collaborate and build new relationships that you can use moving forward. Data-driven, the next point. When experimenting, look to shape your objectives around the data you would like to collect. At the end of your experiment, you'll be sharing your results. In fact, even during your experiments, you may be sharing your results with different groups of stakeholders. It's important, if not essential, that you're able to communicate the results in a format and a manner that makes sense to those stakeholders. Nothing will support your argument better than data. Now, the next point is one that I kind of think is incredibly important. Create teaching organizations. As you define your experiments and collect experiment results, use their learnings as a teaching tool. So what I'm kind of suggesting here is that by reusing your learning, you can actually not only become a learning organization, but a teaching one. Be open, be very open to sharing what you learn and to teaching others what your results mean. Often, we hear companies aspiring to be learning organizations. By sharing those experiment results, you can help your company to begin becoming a teaching organization. Now, the penultimate bullet point here, be human. So what do I mean by this? It might sound like a very strange kind of principle, but I'm talking in essence about caring more, caring for your team, your customers, caring for the results that you're going to drive. At a time when our human relationship with machines is being recalibrated by the brilliant technologies we saw last week, one of the most important insights I've had is that in order to successfully experiment and create a new future, you have to really care about your project and your people more than anyone else does. So it doesn't matter how fantastic your technologies are, ultimately, the human element of this is going to be the one that determines your success. As of yet, personally, I've not found a better way to experiment to create the future than by applying this principle of caring about the process and the people as much as you possibly can. Now, when introducing my comments regarding the role of experimentation, I asked, where should we start? Now, I'm going to ask, when should we start? The answer is right now. Just look at this, this last bullet point here. We need to begin right now. We need to think and act as technology presentists rather than futurists. If we start today, we can create the future of tomorrow. If we wait until tomorrow, we run the risk of inheriting somebody else's vision of the future. So just as a brief summary here, over the last 2 weeks, over these 3 webinars, we've gone on a bit of a journey where we've discussed the evolving role of technology in our lives and work. We've looked at how we can potentially harness technology to build personalized digital learning strategies. And then today we've discussed a little bit around how we can apply digital learning to improve our teams, organizations, and communities. What final thought would I like to leave you with? In fact, it's a really very simple one. I'd like to ask you to think and act upon the journey we've taken over the last 2 weeks, to think about what can you do today as a technology presentist rather than a futurist to use digital teaching and learning in your teams and organizations. It's been a real pleasure for me to speak with you over the last 2 weeks. Please don't hesitate to contact me via Geeta if you have any questions or I can be helpful in any way. So I think at this stage, I'll pass the microphone back over to Geeta, and if you have any questions, I'll be pleased to try and answer them. Oh, but by the way, if I'm unable to answer all the questions that you have, I'll be pleased to provide answers to the team via email, and they'll be shared with you. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. So I have a couple questions here, and the first one is, what difference do you make between collaboration and cooperation?
Okay, it's a very important question. Can I just start? Excuse me. Can I just start by saying, very often I hear people speak very warmly and very positively about collaboration. In my experience, collaboration exists at a number of different levels, and when it's done at the higher levels, it's a very difficult and very challenging process. Now, the reason I say that is at the lower levels of collaboration, where you meet with people, for example, from other teams or other business functions, it can all be very polite and very warm and very nice. You can have cups of tea together, you can kind of share plans, but at that point, you're not completely kind of codependent. Okay, as you kind of collaborate at higher levels and you have projects and objectives and outcomes together, collaboration will really test your work styles, your leadership styles, and your commitment to everybody winning. And this is where the point of cooperation comes in. What I fundamentally mean is that in order to collaborate effectively and get the results that you need, you have to cooperate and at times also compromise. To cooperate effectively, sometimes you have to kind of not win completely yourself to allow another person or another team to win so that everybody collectively can get the results that they wish. So in essence, I'm trying to suggest that underneath the coat of collaboration, there's a whole other area of cooperation and compromising that can be very challenging, because often in organizations, we're taught to look after our own interests, But when it comes to digital activities, digital transformation, digital teaching, digital learning, we have to find ways to cooperate, because we're going to be working outside of our traditional kind of reporting lines. Just one quick example. Even if it's a simple example like creating an online or digital program, you're going to have to work with your kind of audio video teams. You're going to have to work with designers, et cetera, in that team. You're going to have to work with your finance primes, because you're going to have to determine a compensation strategy for the faculty or for people who are actually kind of involved in all of this. You're going to have to work very closely with your marketing departments in a way that you perhaps haven't before, to determine the digital marketing kind of channel mix, how you're going to bring all of this to market. And so you end up in a very in a very kind of diverse, multifunctional type of thing. So collaboration is important, but you can't collaborate effectively unless you're able to cooperate and compromise where necessary. So Geeta, that's kind of my initial answer. I'll be happy to expand upon that by email if useful.
Of course, I'll send you the questions then.
Thank you.
The second question is quite interesting and quite accurate. It's how can we create a team of teams in an organization in which various parts are enabled to or willing to connect?
So I think it comes a little bit back to these kind of 4 C's in the first place. So kind of collaboration, cooperation, compromise, and the fourth one, communication. I think it's an interesting metaphor, I suppose, is kind of social media itself. So if you think about your LinkedIn accounts or kind of your Facebook accounts, or however you kind of socially kind of communicate, you'll notice that you have a number of different. You're connected to a number of different groups. Think of it like a network type of map, okay? You have kind of the people who are in your team, in your business function. Then there's people that you perhaps went to college with, university with, or kind of went on training programs with, or just bumped into. Then you have your personal friends and all of these types of people. What I'm kind of suggesting is that beginning today, we all have to try and kind of have a more diverse organizational group of contacts, okay? And this isn't something that happens overnight. I'm very realistic about, organizational realities and potential siloing and functional kind of things. But ultimately, humans are kind of social beings. And if we have relationships with people, even if they're very superficial to begin with, they give us an opportunity to kind of then explore and make them a bit deeper. So I think the first thing I would say is kind of try to find a more diverse group of organizational contacts. And then the critical thing, the really, really critical thing, it comes down to psychology, I suppose, which is the same as any relationship. Relationships are built upon trust. So how do you build trust where it isn't really there right now? In my experience, you have to give first. Hopefully all relationships are balanced 50-50, but that's not the reality, is it? Of course. And I think when you're in a situation where you're trying to kind of collaborate or build relationships with groups or teams or individuals that don't normally kind of respond well, then you have to kind of give something first and try and build trust. Because with that trust, then you then have the opportunity to kind of explore opportunities for working together, contacting people. You have to put some time and energy and, give something first is what I would say, Rita.
Okay. We have one last question here, and it is the following. How can you decide which content is more suitable for digital formats, and which one is better suited for physical learning?
Okay, so I would kind of look at the question in a slightly different way to begin with. Okay, that I think the starting point is with regard to is to kind of understand that when it comes to learning objectives, okay, what's the exit level outcome? What are the learning objectives? What do you want to be able to do? Or what do you want participants to be able to do at the end of the learning experience that they couldn't in the first place. Now, we know, kind of just based on our experience, that certain things are easier digitally in terms of learning objectives to achieve than physical. Yeah, there are certain things we can do better in physical environments, certain things we can do better in kind of digital, historically speaking. So for example, I remember in a previous life when I worked in a telecoms company, that we were very good at digital learning for statutory kind of broadcast information sharing, okay? And then when it came to real knowledge building, and I'm talking about 15, 20 years ago here, when it came to kind of really building knowledge and experience and skills, we tended to do those in a physical classroom where we could have the whites of the eyes and we were actually in front of people. Now, I would argue today, with kind of the introduction of technologies like AI, machine learning, augmented virtual realities, robotics, and lots of other technologies and their products, we can do more of the things that we used to do well in a physical environment can be done really well digitally, okay? So I think my starting point would be to look at the learning objective and to see what learning objectives, given the digital tools that we have, which of them can be done really well. Then when it comes to the content, I think critically it's a design question, okay? The truth is that it's very, very difficult to effectively deliver content that was developed for a physical environment in a digital way. You have to change it. I'll just give you a few examples that I'll be happy to expand upon by email. But just a couple of examples. When we teach in a physical classroom, we tend to repeat ourselves a little bit. We tend to kind of tell longer stories. When it comes to digital content, based on the neuroscience of learning, we need to be crisper, shorter, more direct. Okay. Now, if you do that in a physical environment, it appears a little bit cold. Okay. But in a digital environment, if you take the approach of a physical space, a physical classroom, it goes on too long and it can become very boring for participants. Okay. And they lose engagement, discretionary effort, and the results kind of suffer. So I think when it comes to the content question, you have to take a step back and think about what digital design will allow me, what user experience, what digital design will allow me to use this content or kind of evolve this content in a really good way. So what you'll probably find is that if you have, for example, a 90-minute in-person session, when you come to deliver it online, it might become 30 minutes or 45 minutes because it becomes more compact, okay? So this is, you know, I'll be very happy to kind of expand upon this because it's a very important question. But in essence, to begin with, I would say be careful about the distinction of your learning objectives from the content. And when it does come to the content, think of it from a user experience and a design perspective.
Oh, thank you, Professor. I think that we don't have any more questions. Do you have any closing words for our participants?
Sorry, I think I've missed that, but if it's an invitation just for a closing comment, can I just say two things? Firstly, it's been a complete pleasure for me to spend time with you over the last 2 weeks. If you have any questions, please reach out via Gita to me and I'll be happy to kind of provide answers. And then the final thing is, you know, please, as of today, start thinking about how you can use digital learning for yourself, for your teams, and to help your organizations, because we have a responsibility, don't we, to kind of realize as much of our own potential and that of our teams as we possibly can. And I think digital learning is a real kind of really great way to access information and create knowledge. And we just need to do it. We just need to get started. So please do that. And I wish you all the very best. Okay.